2/3 of the general public think that scientists have already created a cell in the lab. But this, to me, sounds almost like a religion where they're unable to defend it, so they get angry with me. I'm told to leap for joy because these people are coming against me. My wife said, "What are you doing?" I said, I'm leaping. That's the best I can do.
Dr. Tour is TT and WF Chow Professor of Chemistry, and also a Professor of Computer Science and a Professor of Materials Sciences and Nanoengineering in the Nanocarbon Center in Rice University. He has hundreds of peer-reviewed papers published under his name, and he also have tens of patents under his name with a great contribution to science in his field, and a great commentator, especially on the area of origin of life, aside of his own work in synthetic chemistry. Is this a good description, Dr. Tour?
That's fine, thank you.
Okay, Jim, first of all, I want to ask you, you are one of the very few scientists, I think you are counted as one of the top 50 scientists worldwide. And with this kind of status, you are one of the very few ones who have come out and spoken so bluntly about the reality of fields like origin of life, with all its philosophical and existential implications. And some are saying, well, it's because Dr. James Tour is a man of faith, a man who believes in God. So maybe the first thing I would like to ask you, and it is an important question, I think, for many people who live in this modern world and in the West. Can somebody be scientifically minded? Can somebody be a man of science and also consistently with himself a man of faith or even great faith in God? How do you, from your personal experience, see those two things reconciled? I'm going to ask you later about how you became a man of faith, but let's start by this one.
Well, for those who think that you cannot be a great scientist and be a man of faith, you don't know history. Historically, there are many scientists that were people of faith, as well as great and famous scientists. And that continues on till today. And I'm not the only one amongst people that I know that are people of faith that love our Lord and want to live for Him, and also publish in the highest level journals that are out there. So this happens all the time. So the answer is yes, it can happen. If you think it cannot happen, then what are you going to do with me and the many other people? So that's a misunderstanding if people have that sort of understanding. And if they think that faith will make you a poorer scientist, then why is it that people with faith can be functioning in the highest ranks of science? I mean, so you just have to look at the evidence.
Some people say that this is an artifact of the past, that at one point, every scientist was part of his civilization. So at one point, every scientist was Muslim because Muslims were leading the world. At one point, every scientist was a Christian because the Christian world became the leader of the world. I mean, in the scientific area. So some would say now it is a world that has been awakened by many things that they thought were direct acts of God, and now they have scientific explanations. So it doesn't make sense that a scientist who at least believes in methodological naturalism as part of his work would believe in, a divine creator. What would you say to these people?
I mean, it's going to be hard for people to believe such a thing because there's so many examples in the world of great scientists today that are alive today that are coming from that are devout Christians, that are devout Jews that I know, and they're very active scientists, and even and devout Muslims that I've known that are very active scientists. So So the data is against you if you embrace that, and because it's not an area of conflict for many. I think for those who are not so devout in their faith, yet scientists, they think it's an area of conflict. But when you're devout in your faith, I don't think it's an area of conflict at all. I don't see, I read the Bible every day. I've read the Bible every day of my life for the past 45 years, every day for the past 45 years. And I read it from beginning to end. And the Bible is 3 or 4 times the length of the Quran, to give you just an idea of how long it is. And I read that from beginning to end. And when I'm done, I start again for the last 45 years. And I have never seen a conflict between something that's said in the Bible and a fact within science. Certainly I see conflicts between theories in science, but I've never seen a conflict between a fact in science, something that we know to be a fact, and something that is said in the Bible. So for me, it's not a controversy, never has been.
Wow. All right. So since you've come out very boldly, and really, I think it's not only me, but hundreds of thousands or even millions of people around the world are grateful to you for shedding light on this area of great complexity to many, which is origins of life research and the biochemical origins of life, how it is really explained by science. But then the question, given what you have just said, is as people who believe in God, like me and you and others who believe in God from the different religions, the very obvious aspect of God that makes him God is that he's the creator. So when we're talking about an area like origin of life, maybe an origin of the universe, an origin of consciousness, an origin of humanity, it's so important to people both on the atheist and theist camps because it touches on that creation and divinity and the relation between God and man and life. How is it possible that you believe that God created life, but also accept methodological naturalism and accept that there is research? Maybe you think that this research cannot find the solution now, but I think you accept that it can find a solution later about how biological systems came into existence. How can you believe in God as a creator and in the same time reconcile in your mind as a scientist being a scientist and methodological naturalism? How is this possible? And what would you advise people to make it possible and easy for them?
Okay, well, first of all, just by the definition of science itself, it doesn't have a tool for assessing the supernatural. It's outside the bounds of science. By the definition of science itself, it's outside its bounds. So it cannot make that assessment, number one. Number two, you talked about humanity, consciousness, life. Long before you have humanity, long before you have consciousness, you have to have life. You have to have the first living cell. And we don't even know how to make a living cell. So in other words, we are so far away from solving this problem. And probably the easiest way that I can say that is this. Let's say you didn't have to make any of the chemicals needed for life. Let's just assume that, because you can take a living cell and you can take it apart into its constituent pieces. You can get all the amino acids, you can get all the polysaccharides, the sugars, you can get all the polypeptides, all the enzymes, all the nucleic acids, the DNA and the RNA, and all of the lipids, those 4 classes of compounds. And you can present them to any scientist in the world. Okay, I've deconstructed a cell. We have cells all around us. You can deconstruct the cell and take all the chemicals of the cell and put them before a scientist in discrete bottles. Could you put these together to form a working cell? And no scientist in the world would ever say that they can put those together to make a working cell. So even if you had all the parts, we don't know how to construct it. just throwing them together is like throwing all the parts of a car in a pile and thinking the car's going to start running. It's not going to start running. So we have no idea, even in our modern laboratory, let alone on an early Earth, how that happened. Now, the reason I say that I'm quite open to getting this thing solved, and I presume it will be solved someday, is because things advance. And things advance rather rapidly, but still, I think it's going to be hundreds of years, maybe 100 years, maybe 200 years, maybe 500 years, before we're able to take those elemental components, those molecular components, and put them together and form a cell. Then, on top of that, you've got to have a root on an early Earth to make all of those different compounds, and then to get them all in the same place at the same time. So it's a crazy hard problem. Origin of life is a very, very hard problem. And you have to have the origin of the simplest life, a cell, before you can ever have higher organisms, or you could have a consciousness that as far as we know, it's only happening in people, at least to the level that we understand. Maybe it's happening in whales or dolphins or something or another, but hard for us to assess. But a consciousness, as you have, this is a much deeper thing. Now, that's if you take that one cell became the origin of all life. It may not be that way at all. And so we just don't know. The biblical understanding is that in 6 days, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, some people take those 6 days as 6 24-hour periods. Other people say, no, those were periods of time, because there are cases in the Bible where God had used the word day to meaning an era, a block of time. And so there's a lot of discussion back and forth in the 6 days of creation. Were those 24-hour days, or were those much longer periods? We do have others like Gerald Schroeder, who's an Orthodox Jew, who suggests that in the early phases of the universe, what's speculated is that all of this blew up from a mass. There was an origin to the universe, which actually matches up quite well with what the Bible says, that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So there was a beginning. Prior to 1964, and certainly in the early 50s, the vast majority of scientists believe in a steady state, that the universe always was. And now almost all scientists would say, no, the universe had a beginning. And we know that from microwave background radiation that tells us there was an origin. So the universe is expanding, and you can track that back to a particular point. And if you were to track it back, would you say that if God created the heavens and the earth in day one, there was light in day 2 and day 3, and he made each new component, and then life comes, and it's simple life, and then birds, and then animals, and last of all humans? If you want to have that scenario, what Gerald Schroeder has shown is that actually if you have an expanding universe, and this is near the origins, this is further back in time in the origins, then those periods, that what looks to us as a 24-hour day would be a much longer period of time. To our appearance would be a very long period of time, even though it may have been a 24-hour day back then, because as the universe expands, time is relative to the expansion, to where you are in the expansion of the universe. So time is relative to the place in the universe. So there are lots of theories on how the Bible might match up with where science is. And so, there's a lot of things that we're not clear upon. I don't even understand, even to set aside origin of life, I don't even understand how you go from lower organisms, from that single cell, up to higher organisms, to large-bodied creatures like us, and how you have these body plan changes between creatures. So it would seem, if you're a person of faith, that there were divine acts along the way. It's called progressive creationism, that God created on the first day this, the second day this, the third day this. So God progressively created, and then finally on the sixth day he created people. So there are things in the Bible that are hard to understand exactly what he meant, how much of that was actual real data in the sense of saying exactly what happened, or how much of that was allegorical? Because we know that there are allegorical things written in the Bible, that we're not supposed to take everything literally. So, for example, at one point, Jesus was speaking with his disciples, and he said, "Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. Beware of the leaven, the bread of the Pharisees." The leaven, the raised bread of the yeast that's in the bread of the Pharisees, the religious teachers. Yeah. And so they started looking around and they started saying to each other, "Who forgot the bread?" They didn't have any bread, and they're trying to blame one another. Jesus said, wait a minute, guys. I'm not talking about literal bread here. I'm talking about the teachings of the Pharisees. So they took something literally, and he meant it allegorically. He meant it figuratively. And Jesus said, I am the door. I am the door. Whoever comes to God needs to enter through me. I am the door. Well, did that mean that he was a physical door? No. Obviously, he was speaking allegorically. So there are clearly times in the Bible where they were even reproved for taking things literally when they were supposed to take it allegorically. And so this is part of the problem. Whenever we read a text that's like a holy text, what is it that we take absolutely literally? What is it that we take allegorically? And a lot of that can be pieced together by the amount of times that it says and the context in which it says it. But again, so these are things that we're dealing with. And then there's science. It's very hard to track back to the origin of life and say, how would this happen on an early earth? Well, we can't even do it on our most modern laboratory. We can't even create life, and we can't even define life. I mean, how do you define when a cell just dies? How do you define what it is that you just lost? Is it, yeah, you've lost ionic potentials, you've lost, but what is that spark that was there a moment ago and is no longer there? A lot of other parts of the cell can be in place, but what have you just lost? So even the definition of life, not the characteristics of life you can certainly talk about, but the definition of life is not an easy definition. Yeah. Just like the definition of consciousness is not an easy definition. So this is what we're up against. So there's a lot of things in science that are hard to explain. There are a lot of things in the Bible that are hard to explain.
Yeah. Wonderful answer, actually, Dr. Tour. And actually, the creation account in the Quran, for example, is very close to that in Genesis. And I want to share a special verse in the Quran with you, because I think it touches very well on this great mission you've embarked on. And I'll say it in Arabic and then I'll translate it in English. It says this: ما أشهدتهم خلق السماوات والأرض ولا خلق أنفسهم وما كنت متخذ المضلين عضدا. And what it means is, the translation of meaning is, I have not made them witness the creation of the heavens and the earth, nor the creation of themselves. And I am not taking the deceivers as aids or as helpers. And the reason I'm mentioning this is that, to me, it suggests that there will be a lot of deceit, a lot of people who will come in the future, and he's using this term them, pronoun them, so he's not talking about people of faith, he's talking about the others. I think what it means is that there will be a time where people who do not have faith would like to deceive other people and tell them, here is the way the creation is done, here is the way the creation of life is done. So the origin of the universe, here's the origin of humanity, here is the origin of life and consciousness, and there is no need for God. And why I'm mentioning this is that so many times you've said, you're talking to the public, you're talking to the lay person, and you're giving this message. Guys, if they have been selling you the idea that all of this has been figured out, it's not true. What's your comment on this? And what is there deceit? And what's the origin of this deceit? How would you see this in the light of this verse, in your opinion? Is it really happening today? Why and how? And why have you embarked on this mission?
Okay, so there's many questions embodied in this comment, and so let me begin. Now, motivations are harder for me to assess. What are people's motives? And I think in the sciences, a lot of times the motivation may not be necessarily evil in their own mind. The motivation is that this whole origin of life, that chemicals came together and they formed these cells, and cells became higher order structures, and these evolved into eventually human beings, for example. This is the only ball game in town in the sciences. This is the only thing there is. This is the only thing we're taught in schools in the United States and in the Western world. This is the only thing we're taught. And so you grow up hearing this, and so then you continue along with this explanation. So the motivation isn't necessarily to be evil, to be deceptive. This is the only ball game in town for them. And then you see research papers that continue along with this scenario and giving more and more detail to this story about how it happened. And the people don't have, it's not like they're trying to put forth a wrong message. It's just that this is all that they've ever had. So motivations are on one side. Are there people with bad motives to draw people away from the faith? I don't know, maybe some, but I would think that that's a small number. Generally,
I
people
have come across many atheist people or agnostic people who openly say they are atheist and agnostic. I've gone through so many debates, live debates, okay, with people. Some of them actually attended your Rice University debate, like Aaron Ra, for example. And he says, just like that, well, there is no need for God because, it's abiogenesis and then evolution. All right. And there's like whatever the Big Bang caused, and maybe the universe is bouncing and maybe multiverse and maybe whatever. So he would tell me, Ahmad, there is no need for your God or for any Abrahamic God or for any God whatsoever. This is irrespective if they are scientists or not, but they present themselves to the public as scientists, and they just, this is how it is. And yeah.
Yeah, so I still think that number is small. The number is small relative to all the scientists in the world. But okay, there is a small number. Now, the other thing is that science is limited in what it can do and what it can answer. Nobody can look back in time very easily to discern what happened, particularly with origin of life. All we can do are simulations in our laboratory that might simulate an early Earth. And when you do that, it's really, really hard to get at this. So what I say is that yes, it is true that I am very blunt. I say, this is not true. What these people are saying is not true. And they will find a little experiment in their lab, and then they'll come with big extrapolating statements, both in their research papers and especially to the press. And then I come along and I say, that's not true. That's not true. You didn't even make RNA. I mean, you bought every precursor to it, and then what you polymerized was not really a strand of RNA. It had no embedded information. It had a lot of the 2,5 wrong linkage in it. It had a lot of branching, so it could never even respond. So why would you then tell the press, now we are on the verge where Darwinian evolution can take over, which is a huge, huge extrapolation, and I challenge them on it. So yes, I do challenge them on it. And when I challenge them on it, they never come back at me with the data and to say, oh, no, Jim, you're wrong. Here's how we would go from this to Darwinian evolution. They just get upset with me. So you see, what happens, Ahmed, if you really have something that's concrete in science, you just show the data and you explain the data. But this, to me, sounds almost like a religion where they're unable to defend it, so they get angry with me. They want to cancel me. They want to say things about me. And listen, if they had the data, they would just show it. Okay, here's how you would go from what I made to Darwinian evolution. Here's how. But no, they don't show it. They just want me to be quiet. So yes, I'm putting it right back in their plate. And what I have found is that they're being more careful in what they say. They're being more careful in what they write because they know that I'm reading and I'm making comments about it, and I'm making YouTube videos about this. So yes, I am calling them out. Now, why am I doing this? Because I'm just frustrated hearing all of this stuff. I've looked at it, and it's frustrating because they're saying something, and what they're doing is they're really retarding the field. They're holding it back because they're making it out as if we're much further along than we are. We're on the verge of solving this life's origin. And if we're on the verge of science, solving this, then young people don't want to go and study this because they assume it's already been solved. In fact, most of the general public thinks that scientists, 2/3 of the general public think that scientists have already created a cell in the lab, like a bacterium, which is not the case at all. So 2/3 of the general public believes that, and 80% of that 2/3 people, 80% of them had college degrees. So of those who were surveyed had college degrees. So you see that it is a real problem, and I just keep calling it out. So again, motivations are harder for me to assess, but the reality is, yes, I am one of the very few that's speaking this up. I'm not the only one, and historically, I mean, in the last 20 years, there have been others. Carnes Smith wrote a book in the 1980s that talked about the real problems with origin of life. And Shapiro has come with talking about the real problems on the origin of life and wrote a book on this. And so I'm saying this, and others are saying it, and now others are coming around as well. Lee Cronin, who anyone would have said was a proponent on the origin of life, who said in 2011 that he'd have life in his lab in about 2 years. He hoped to have life in his lab in 2 years, is now coming out and saying that origin of life is a sham. And when he's been questioned about it, when he's elaborated on it, he says, look, you make one molecule, you make another, but there's no end to this. You keep making it, and then anytime you want to make a cell, you're going to have to start with a living cell, which tracks all the way back to Luca, the first cell, the first of the origin of that cell. So he's beginning to see what I'm saying, and hopefully others would come around too. Now, I don't know that he's going to say, yeah, I've come around to where Jim Tour is, but it certainly sounds like it, because I didn't go around saying origin of life is a scam until I heard Lee Cronin. So then I said, okay, well, if Lee's going to say it, I'll say it too.
Yeah. Amazing, actually, this change, especially he had his own exchange with you. I remember I've watched that one some time ago, and Dave Farina was also referring to him quite a lot, and I've also seen a lot of his own material where he was very adamant about we're so close. So it was really striking that he suddenly turned. So who knows what happens tomorrow? But really, I wanna share something else. Go ahead, yeah, please.
Okay. Go ahead.
No.
Well, that's why I said that he's been born again.
I hope so. So I want to share something else with you, and it's another verse in the Quran, and I'm not sure if there is something similar to it in the Bible. Maybe you can tell me. So it says this. It is in a chapter called the spider, okay, Al-Ankabut, and it is interesting also to me why it's in the spider chapter. And in this chapter, it says that the weakest of homes is the home of the spider. And the spider would make this web and catch little things, etc. So it says this, قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَانْظُرُوا كَيْفَ بَدَأَ الْخَلْقِ. Walk the earth and look how creation has started. ثُمَّ اللَّهُ يُنْشِئُ النَّشْأَةَ الْأَخِيرَةَ. Then Allah, which is the name of God in Arabic, makes the second coming hereafter, which is the meaning of إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. Surely Allah is over everything powerful. And what it suggests to me is that when you start looking into origins of life research, like you do, it strengthens your faith. It shows you something where you say, wow, God has said that he created life. It can only come from an all-powerful being. Having gone through this deep dive into the research, you're a synthetic chemist, but it's not your primary field of research, origin of life. When you went into origin of life, already being a scientist, and you've had this multiple years of deep dive and debates about it and videos over videos, did it cause you to say, wow, this is a witness of the all-powerful God, or not?
Well, yeah, science in general does that to me. I mean, every time I study science, so I thought that people were much further along in origin of life than what they were when I started looking at it. And the more I looked at it, the more I was confused with what people were saying because it didn't make sense. And yes, when I look at the complexity of a living cell, I'm not talking about a human being. I'm just talking about a simple cell. When I look at the complexity of that, I'm like, wow, this is utterly amazing. And how the molecules come together and start operating. We don't know how to do that. You know, I work in the area of nanotechnology. We don't know how to get groups of molecules to work together like this. And this is why the camera that I'm looking into is made out of silicon. It's not made out of molecules where they've stacked up molecules to function together. They've built this out of electronics. Although my eye is just a bunch of molecules working together. There's no silicon electronics in it. So they're both lenses, and they're both recording information. So the eye is transferring information to my brain, and it's recording information. In that case, you have something that's a lens and then made out of silicon and transferring information to a storage chip in the camera. They're both doing similar sorts of functions, but we don't know how to build with molecules like that. It's really, really hard to build with molecules like that. And even if you built one with molecules like that, it wouldn't stay around very long because the molecules oxidize, the molecules decompose. And so in natural systems, what you do is you have antioxidants around, you have enzymes around that keep repairing these things, constantly repairing them because the molecules are decomposing. And so yeah, it makes you say, God, oh my Lord, how did you do this? And it wasn't just origin of life. It actually happened, I think more than ever when we were working about 25 years ago on trying to build a molecular brain. And we were trying to put molecules together to build switching devices. And my son was about 3 years old at the time, and he came running to me. And I thought, how do you do this? I'm trying to make just very, very simple switching functions out of molecules. And here you have all this coordinated motion. You have this talking to me. And then I would just watch insects and tiny, tiny little brain. You have all this coordinated motion and so much calculations going on in order for that insect to do what it does. And we don't know how to do that with molecules. So yes, science causes me to see God. I see God actually much more, I think, than the non-scientists. So if, for example, I look at a tree, there's a green leaf, and in that leaf, there's a magnesium atom sitting in the middle of a porphyrin, and there's billions of those things, and the light is funneled in to that leaf into the middle of the porphyrin. It hits that magnesium atom, and that ejects an electron, and that starts the photosynthesis process so that the tree can grow. So when I look at a leaf, I think of a porphyrin with a magnesium atom sitting in the middle, and the poor man and woman on the street who's not a scientist, they don't have that ability. They don't see anything there but a green leaf, and I can see in my mind's eye in the depths of that. And so when I look at a tree and a car has run into the tree and the car is destroyed and the tree is still standing there just fine, I just think of these polysaccharides that have these hydrogen bonds between them. So it has this flexural strength and this enormous impact strength. And if you just had a plastic column and you run a car into that, the plastic column is going to just totally break to bits. But you have a tree, and if, a car runs into it, the tree stays there and the car is destroyed. Because I see the carbohydrate strands and how they're sticking together in these polysaccharides in the tree in my mind's eye because I know the structure. So when you're a scientist, it actually gives you a much deeper appreciation for God because you see in your mind's eye what God has made, and you just say, Lord, you are amazing.
Wow. So in your opinion, Dr. Swart, is it more rational for somebody who is well entrenched in science like yourself to make him more wondering about the enormous magnificence and power and beauty of a necessary being who is the creator of the universe? Or is it more rational that he becomes an atheist, in your opinion?
In my opinion, I think it would be more rational that you would stand in awe and you would say, oh God, you're amazing. And you certainly see this with scientists. You see this with physicists that have said, hey, this whole universe seems to be designed. You have these functions here where you have this finely tuned functions, these finely tuned parameters that had to be there for life to exist. All of this fine tuning in the universe, all of these physical constants, why are they what they are? Without them being that way, there would be no life. And so you certainly have physicists, you certainly have astrophysicists looking at the heavens, and they're amazed at this thing, and they wonder about a creator. So I think that science actually causes us to wonder about a creator, but man's heart is quite devious. And the Bible even says that man's heart is sicker than all else. Who can understand it? And so what happens is, the Bible says that man has a tendency, when I say man, I mean men and women, humankind has a tendency to deny the truth which is in front of us. So you look at it and you just have to scratch your head as a chemist and say, how do molecules go together? How can this happen? And the Bible says God puts this before us as a witness, and then humankind will deny the truth, and then they will start worshiping the creation rather than the creator.
Wow. Is this a verse in the Bible that says that God puts this in front of us as a witness?
Absolutely. In Romans chapter 1, and then he says that and then what happens, because they deny the creator, they start worshiping the creation rather than the creator. And just a few weeks ago, I did a podcast with two scientists, and this woman kept saying that, for her, she goes out in the wilderness and she sits by a stream, and to her, that's God. And I said, well, that's the creation. How about worshiping the creator? She says, well, I see God in everything. I said, well, then you're a pantheist. I mean, then you say God is in the object of his creation, but there is a creator behind that. But as much as I appreciate that woman, she's worshiping the creation rather than the creator, the one who made it. So yes, this happens. Right. When you deny the truth, you're going to start worshiping the creation rather than the one who made it.
Wow. And the reason I asked you if this is a verse in the Bible, it is because it is actually also a verse in the Quran. So in another chapter called Fussilat, which is made very detailed, it says, سنريهم آياتنا في الآفاق وفي أنفسهم حتى يتبين لهم أنه الحق. We will show them our signs in the horizons and within themselves until it is evident to them that it is the truth. And then the commentary on that is, أَوَلَمْ يَكْفِ بِرَبِّكَ أَنَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ شَهِيدٌ. Isn't it enough that your Lord is witness over all things? It's as if he's saying, if you are not going to be witness for it, I am enough witness. So it struck me that you used the same thing. And it's also wonderful that a person with your, in your category, in the scientific hierarchy, is a witness that looking at origins, looking at the very small things, and looking at the very deep time, and looking at your daily work, makes you a witness of God's grandeur and God's greatness and magnificence. So great testimony, really. And when I first started watching your videos, I thought this is a man who came to faith through science. How did you come to faith? And then how did you keep being a man of faith publicly? And did it cause you problems in your career? Because some wouldn't say that I'm a person of faith if they are in the scientific discipline because they're afraid it will give them problems. So how did you come to faith, and did it cause you problems? And what is your advice to people in your position, or who want to be in your position?
Yeah, I didn't come to faith as a scientist. I came to faith at the age of 18. I was a freshman in college, so I was not much of a scientist. I grew up in a secular Jewish home in New York City, just outside New York City. I was born in New York City, grew up just north of the city. Secular Jewish home means that we were only in synagogue once or twice a year. That's about when I went. I'm sure you have secular Muslims whom you know that only go to the mosque once or twice a year on some high holy day. And I would, go on maybe Yom Kippur and a Passover or something, I would go. But other than that, and we never spoke about God in my home. We never talked about sin. We never talked about God. And then when I went to college, I met a young man, and we got to talking, and he perceived that I was not a person of faith, and he asked me if he could give me an illustration of the gospel message that Jesus, the first thing he did is he had me read a verse from the Bible, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And I said, I haven't sinned. I'm not a sinner, which sounds like a very strange thing to a person of faith. But in modern secular Judaism, we don't view, at least I didn't view little things as sin. I said to him, I never killed anybody. I never robbed a bank. I'm not a sinner. Mm-hmm. So then he turned to another verse in the Bible, and Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5, verse 28, he said, I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Wow. If you look at a woman with lust for her, you've committed adultery with her in your heart. I didn't know you could commit adultery in your heart. As I was enough of a Jew to know that adultery was wrong. That's one of the 10 commandments. But I didn't know you could commit it in your heart. I thought that that's something you did physically. And I was guilty of that. In fact, I couldn't look at a woman any other way but with lust for her. And immediately I was convicted of my sin. And what's interesting about that, Ahmed, is why should I even care what Jesus said 2,000 years ago? I didn't know Jesus was a Jew. The rabbis told us Jesus was a Christian, but actually Jesus was Jewish. I didn't know he was Jewish. Yeah. And so why should I even care? But his words have such power. It arrested me. It stopped me in my tracks. So this young man now had my attention. And then he described to me, I read one verse after another, how God forgives me because Jesus died for my sins on the cross, and there is nothing that I can do to work for my salvation. No good works that I can do. He accepts me because of the work that Jesus did. I just receive that by faith. And then once I am in his kingdom, then he calls me to do lots of good works. But the good works don't get me in. It's just like with my children. If they think that if they think that they have to do a lot of good works to keep being my child, I'd be like, no, you're my child. That can't change. You're in my family now. And you're born into the family. That's never going to change. Now, I'd appreciate you doing good things, but it's not the good things that make you my child. And so it's not something I can work for. And then I received Jesus shortly after that, a few months after that, and everything changed. I couldn't stop thinking about him. And I started reading the Bible every day. And that's why I say for 45 years, I've been reading this book every day, because the young man who shared with me said, I said, how can I stay close to God? He said, if you read your Bible every day, you'll stay close to God. If you don't, you won't. Wow. So I've read it every day. And so then the other question, so I didn't come to God as a scientist. I came, he hit me in the heart. I mean, just hit me in the heart and convicted me of my sin. Wow. And then as I was learning science, I never saw anything in science that shook my faith. Never. I mean, I'd hear professors say things, but I just dismissed it in the sense that if it was contrary to what the Bible say, I would say, well, he's talking about a theory. He's not talking about a fact. And scientific theories change all the time. All the time they change. I mean, even in the last 30 years, lots of scientific theories have bitten the dust. I mean, they're over because theories change. And facts remain, theories change. And none of the facts of what I learned ever contested with what the Bible says. And then you said, does it affect my career? Yeah, it affects my career. But Jesus said, if they hate you, just know that they hated me before they hated you. And Jesus said, blessed are you when men revile you and persecute you and say all manner of evil against you falsely on account of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. He said, woe to you, if all men speak well of you, for so your fathers spoke of the false prophets. Yeah, are the people that come against me because of my faith? Yes. Do I expect it? Absolutely. Jesus said this would happen. He warned me about this. So I'm not surprised by this. And he says, rejoice in this. In other words, I'm not supposed to just endure this. He said, I am to rejoice and be happy in this. In fact, in another one of the verses, he says, leap for joy when this happens. So sometimes I'll jump up in the air. My wife says, what are you doing? I said, I'm leaping. That's the best I can do.
If you do not believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus
because
Christ,
these people
send
are coming
me an email
against me.
and give me a chance to tell you by Zoom why I believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ.
So I expect it. And yes, it affects my career. But what God does on the other side is he keeps giving us all these inventions and all these things. I've started 12 companies, 13 companies. I think the 14th we're founding right now. And the value of these companies is billions in value. And these are all just based on inventions from my laboratory. And so what academic chemist has this? Very few. And then we discover one thing after another, after another. We have over several hundred patents, and we just keep coming with more. I mean, I'm filing 1 to 2 patent disclosures a month, and just more keeps coming. So the more people come against me, the more he blesses me, which is exactly what he said would happen. So that's kind of the story of my life.
Wow. I hope so many have listened to those great advice from you. Number one, I wish every Muslim and every person who believes would read his scripture every day like you, in my case, the Quran. I also hope that people who go from the historical land of the prophets, what is called today the Middle East, and go and learn in the West, in the States or in the UK or wherever, don't get to be atheists at the end of the day. I'm always surprised when I hear about a friend or a relative of mine who have sent his kid to learn in this or that university, learn physics or chemistry, and then next thing he tells me my son or my daughter has become atheist. And I'm always, why? When I talk to people like yourself, I've also had, for example, Dr. Hugh Ross, I had Dr. Fazran, I had so many renowned scientists, and they said the same message. Science brings us close to God. It is the message you've told us is there in the Bible. It is the message in the Quran. And I don't know why this is happening. So I hope so many people would listen to this advice of yours, especially this matter of compensation, that God will compensate you and will make things good for you eventually. And so you have experienced this yourself. And what you do is that you smile, you give them the smile and you leap in joy. So that's quite a tease. But fine. So
I mean, Ahmed, so what happens when you look at this? Even all the men and women who come against me on Origin of Life, my H index is much higher than theirs. You know what an H index is? It's a metric for not just the number of publications, but the impact of your publications. Yeah. And what happens is that it levels off. So the higher the number it gets, the slower it grows. Because if you say a H index is 100, it means that that's not going to go up a notch until another one of your publications exceeds 100 citations. Yeah. So it levels off, but it's higher than all of theirs. And I have colleagues in the administration of the university, and they tell me that, they hear certain people saying things about me, but they say, but the tour's an anomaly. We can't understand him. Here he is, this religious guy, but his research is just booming. And this is what happens. God does bless. And when we walk with him and trust him and believe in his word, there is enormous blessing. There's enormous blessing in believing his word. And I trust him, as the Bible, as Jesus said, he who sent me is trustworthy. And I believe that. He who sent me is trustworthy. Now, we all are going to grow old and sick and die at some point. I mean, that happens to everybody, but we die glorious. We die victorious because death for us is not the end. I know very much. Jesus said, I will come and I will take you to be with me. I mean, so this is going to happen. But while I'm here on this earth, I just keep getting blessed over and over and over again. And the more people come against me, the more they exclude me from their academies, the more that they exclude me from the award system, the more I'm blessed. I mean, it's just like, my God puts it right back in their face. I'm blessed over and over again. And I'm not afraid to say that the success I have is not because of me. I'm not the high IQ guy that you think I am. It's because of the grace of my Lord. It's because of the grace of God. God is so good. He's so gracious. He's so generous. He's so loving. He's so kind. I shall love him forever and ever. And eternity is not long enough for me to give him thanks and praise for all that he's done in my life. I shall forever be grateful to him.
Wow. I hope everyone who's learning science and everyone who has belief in God has just listened with very wide ears and very open mind and heart to what you just said today. What you're just saying to them, guys, children, don't care. Don't care about them coming at you if God is with you. Is it that? If God is with you, don't care about anything else.
Yeah, the Bible says, if God is for you, who could be against you? And he says, don't worry about tomorrow. Or tomorrow has enough trouble. Today has enough trouble of its own. And he says that if he watches over each one of the sparrows, and he knows all the hairs on your head. I mean, so over and over again, he reassures us of his kindness and his mercy. And I'll tell you, Ahmed, I walk around all the time knowing that my God is for me. And I want to please him every day. And when I do something that I know is wrong, I'm running back to him and say, Lord, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. Please forgive me. And it's not like he's going to cast me out of his kingdom. No way. I'm not going to lose it. I'm in the family. It's because I hurt my father's feelings. It's like when my children, they're all grown now, but if they do wrong, they want to come and it's not that they're afraid that I'm going to disown them. They're just sorry that they disappointed me. And I'm going back to him and just apologizing and saying, Lord, I am sorry. I'm sorry for the way that I spoke to that person. I'm sorry. Yes, I'll go back and apologize to them. I'm sorry for what I've done. I'm sorry for having these doubts. And because I don't want to disappoint him. I love him so much. I love God so much. I love my Lord so much. Forever and ever, I'll be thankful to him.
Wow. Jim, there is something that I have received an email about, and I was thrilled to know that you are part of it. So I hope you can share part of it with me and with the audience today. And the reason I was thrilled, it was because of my own story of coming to faith. Of course, I was raised in a Muslim family, but by the age of 13, I started thinking about what really matters. And I was like a science nerd, and I thought this universe and life and what have you cannot be there without a creator, and then we should look at his message and live the way he wants us to live. But the syllabus at school, the science syllabus, doesn't teach that. So the email I got, I think it was from the Center of Science and Culture, and they were talking about an initiative where science education will also be augmented by videos from scientists like you and I think Dr. Steve Meyer and others, who are talking about intelligent design and aspects of design in the universe. Can you share something about that with me and the audience? What is this initiative about? And is this a legacy? And why is it important?
Okay, so I'm not part of the formal organization of that, but I can tell you, so right now in U.S. schools, and I can only speak in the context of the United States, that they still use the primordial soup model, which is not a good model at all, that molecules somehow come together in some pond and form cells, and then those turn into higher order structures. They still use that primordial soup model right on into graduate courses, from elementary school to a graduate course. Yeah. They still use strictly neo-Darwinism, even though geneticists themselves have said this neo-Darwinian of natural selection and random mutation and natural selection governing this evolutionary process. That's no longer even believed by many geneticists themselves. What they're talking about is the universal common descent, so you have a universal common descent model, and that you also have this this DNA-based model that they talk about. But so there are groups like the Discovery Institute that would like to see something on intelligent design coming into schools. And I don't think it's accepted in any of the public school systems right now, but they're trying to show that it's not non-scientific to say that there is an intelligent designer, that you have signs of something that is designed, and there you can make an inference because of the object you see. So if you're walking in some Egyptian desert and you should find a wristwatch. I mean, you could say, well, those sand particles just kind of came together and formed that. Or you could say, well, that was probably left there by somebody. So we intuitively have an indication of signs of design.
Yeah.
And so what they're saying is you have the same thing in natural systems. You intuitively have these signs of design. And this is some recent work actually by Lee Cronin, where he's looking at molecular structure. And when you have enough points where you say, okay, there's this on it, that speaks that it had to have something beyond just a natural occurrence, that had to have points of design. So you have even Lee Cronin pointing in this direction. Wow. And this is what the Discovery Institute is pointing toward, that when you have enough points, we naturally think of design. And so let's bring that into schools, because it is not non-scientific. It is actually scientific to look at that watch that you find in the desert and to say, somebody dropped their watch right here. That didn't just happen from this blowing sand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this initiative will be like, it's more directed to children learning science, right? Is it?
Yeah, so they would start with young children, and then they'd work up to it, because it can actually get quite sophisticated in its approach. And I know it's in Christian schools and in religious schools you will find this. Christian schools and Catholic schools will use this type of information. I don't think it's been allowed in the public school system yet. I might be wrong, but again, I don't watch that. My fights are somewhere else.
Amazing. So I hope God blesses this work of yours, and many children will come to the realization that the very rigid, or the very rough, or I'm not sure, the very devout of spirit kind of science that is being taught today, and it's getting more dry. It's getting drier and drier with time. There is an alternative way of teaching science, and there is in science all the signs for the greatness of the one who created the universe. So I hope this work it becomes a great legacy for you, because we're all going to leave this world, as you said, and those videos of yours, I'm sure they have guided so many people to see the truth and to be disillusioned, or to wake up from the great deceit that is going around all over the place. Now, for our audience, actually, I agree with Dr. Tour that we're going to have like 15-20 minutes at the end if there are questions. So we actually have some questions over the chat. I'm going to, what is a question of them? I'm going to put on the screen, and maybe Jim can actually comment on it. First of all, I would actually like to point out to Dr. Jim Tour handle, YouTube, because he has this great YouTube channel. For those who don't know, he has a channel. Please tune into there, and he has great material about origin and life and many other topics, and his own work. So it's at Dr. James Tour. And for those of you who are not actually subscribers in Finding Truth, come on, guys, press the subscription button and follow the channel. And let's look at some of the questions. Here we have Rafi. He says, brother, I would also like you to briefly outline your thoughts about the recent debate between Tour and Dave Farina here. That would be much appreciated. Well, since we have Dr. Tour, he can actually give a comment about it. I think this one was, many people were waiting for it. Actually, I wrote to Dr. Tour 2 years ago and I said, maybe a good response. And Dr. Tour did 14 episodes and then another round. And I think the importance here is that he's talking to the lay people to make it clear to them, to get them out of the deceit. Dr. Tour, would you like to give any comment about that debate, if at all?
Yes, I'm not pleased with my performance. I got far more passionate than I should have. And so I'm not pleased with my performance. The questions I asked 5, there were 5 questions on the board. I only got to 4 of the 5. Every answer that he put up there was a non-answer scientifically. He put up papers and he would never go to the board, because what happens when you go to the blackboard, it forces you to use the starting materials that were there. So there were specific starting materials. The first question was 2 amino acids. He didn't start with either of those. He has to start with those 2 and make the coupled product. He didn't do that. The second was to take a oligonucleotide and show a chemistry that would allow that to polymerize to make RNA without the 2,5 linkage and without the branching. He didn't show that. He just said, well, these polymerize on montmorillonite clay. Yes, they polymerize on montmorillonite clay, but they have 30 to 70% of the 2,5 branching, of the 2,5 linkage. So that didn't answer the question, but it didn't matter to him. And then he said, I showed 2 sugars. How would this come together? He said enzymes. Let me tell you what that's like. That's like being in a chemistry class and you're given an exam and it says, go from this starting material to this product. And the student writes chemicals. Chemicals would make that happen.
What an answer.
Just say enzymes. Yeah. I mean, that's the answer. And that was his answer. So I am not justifying myself, but you could see what set me off. For somebody to say enzymes, montmorillonite clay, and throw up a paper, it's so frustrating to a scientist. So what I learned from that, I will never try to debate a non-scientist before, because they don't even understand the rules of science. Anyway, as far as the debate, not proud of my performance, but every one of them was not answered, nor has it been answered subsequently.
Well, personally, I am proud of your performance, Jim, so don't be so hard on yourself. But I have a question on this one. So part of your debate, I think, I could relate very much to the debate you had, because some of the talking points I actually went into debates with science explainers about. For example, when you were talking about autocatalysis of RNA, I remember once I made this review, 1-hour review of a scientific paper that had in the title that RNA can autocatalyze, can self-replicate, okay? And I just went through, read the paper word by word. And when you read the body of the paper, it tells you it just stops after 14 nucleotides. It cannot go further. And what struck me and what I was trying to point out to the audience was, the title says, RNA autoreplication or RNA autocatalysis. But when you read it, it says something else. Now, a question to you, how is this allowed in a peer-reviewed paper? And then this gives material to people who are science explainers who say, look at the title of the paper. RNA can self-replicate. Look at this, look at that. Clay can solve the problem. This can solve that. Volcanic vents, whatever it is. And I think a big part of it has to blame on the peer review process. How can a paper that has a deceiving title be accepted to be published? What's your comment on that, especially after you have gone really great length into this matter of origin of life? And I see this so many times in origin of life papers and in evolution-related papers, especially.
Right. So without enzymes, RNA does not duplicate itself. It does not. It's only in very well designed, human designed by experts, primed cases where it's primed and set up to duplicate itself. It's never been able to duplicate more than 10% of itself. 10% is not a duplication, not at all. And that 10% is too short to duplicate anything of itself. So it's not a duplication. Now, as far as why the journals allow this, there's a lot of hype in a lot of journals. And as I said in my introduction in the debate, and they're saying, well, because of the pressures to publish and things, but particularly in the area of origin of life, it is an incestual type of system. In other words, the people who review your papers are themselves origin of life researchers. They will never send to me a paper in origin of life to review because I'm going to speak my mind. So they send it to people who are origin of life researchers, and they allow this sort of nonsense to go into the titles, which take YouTubers and totally deceive them. They said, you see, it says it right here that he's making peptides. It says it right there in the title. The title is meaningless. And even if you read the abstract, it's meaningless. As soon as you start looking at the scientific data, you go to the experimentals and you see what was done, you're like, this is a bait and switch.
Absolutely.
And it's particularly overblown
like clickbait
in the area of origin of life. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I agree with you. It's highly overblown. The system is rigged and it's incestual. The people who review it are themselves origin of life researchers, and the editors, the journal editors, have a lot of blame as well for letting these things continue to propagate. They are responsible too. Because then what happens is you get these gross extrapolations, these overblown claims. Then when it gets into the press, it's blown up even more. So by the time it gets to textbooks, it's crazy.
Absolutely. So I'm glad we discussed this because I'm not sure with good or bad intentions, but so many abstracts and so many paper titles are being misused. But I totally agree with you. It is those people who have peer reviewed this and are keep this, letting it happen. I think we should stand before their conscience, because doesn't this count as deceit? When you have a title that is not representative of the content, isn't this deceit? What's the good word to describe it as deceit?
Well, deceit might be a good word. Again, I don't want to speak of motivations because deceit speaks of motivation. And again, I don't know motivation. It could be mistake. It could be overblown. Deceit is a specific motivation. It might be, but I prefer not to say that.
Well, we can say it's a misrepresentation at least, or the title does not faithfully represent the content. Yeah. So is it your advice that somebody tells you this paper says that people will just go the extra mile and read the content?
I get this all the time. People see a news article and they say, oh, look here, they made life. And as soon as I go to the actual article and I start looking at the details of it's just not there. Trust me, it's not there. It's not there. And don't send me any more news articles. Send me the actual article if you have a question. But I'm telling you, you got to read the actual article. But the problem is the lay public doesn't have the expertise to read those articles. And I have a certain area of expertise, and that's in synthetic chemistry. So the synthetic chemistry papers I can understand immediately. The ones that are on what they've done with DNA, it takes me longer. Because even that stretches me beyond my area. So I have to spend more time with it. But to really understand a research article, for me, takes at least half a day. To really understand, because you can have, in addition to that article, you can have 7,500 pages of supplemental data. And so when you start looking at that, it takes me half a day. Wow. So, so for that debate, we had about, I don't know, it was 80 articles on the table that had been presented. And so I went through, it took me 4 months to study those 80 articles and to read the supplemental twice, to look it over and to really study it. So I was extremely well prepared. I knew every article that we agreed would be the lot of articles. And then what did he do? He pulled out an article that we never agreed on. I just said, you just broke our agreement. You broke our agreement. And I'm the one who is accused of being a liar. I'm the one who's accused of this. And he just put it up there and he kept it up there.
Yeah.
And so then when I asked him questions about it, okay, how much of it duplicated itself? How much? He said, I don't remember.
That's exactly
how much of it had that defect.
That's exactly the point that I related to when he's talking about the replication, because I have actually read some of those papers, and it's just few nucleotides and not whatever the title says. So so that was once again great performance in that debate, and given all the pressure, etc., I think you did so much more than what is expected, so well prepared. So God bless you. There's an interesting question here from Bread of Life, who is actually also a YouTuber, and it's Rebecca, and she tries to do some good explanations also to people. So hi, Rebecca. And she says, Dr. Tour, who are the origin of life researchers that you trust? Are there any who are being fair about their conclusions? So yeah, good question. If you can make some recommendations for people to follow somebody or something.
I don't know the full body of his work, but of current origin of life researchers, of current ones that I'm aware of, I would say Clemens Reichert in Germany wrote an article in 2018, and he said, look, guys, you can't have this human element that you put in where you have really pure materials reacting in really pure environments, and you really are calculating the amount of time and then stopping the reaction right away. He says you have to take the human element out of it. So I think that he's a trustworthy person in that regard, where he called into question his own colleagues. Now, people will say, Tor, if you've got these problems, why don't you write articles and publish that in the literature? And I point to people like Clemens Reichert's paper, which was in Nature Communications, which is a very, very good journal, and nobody pays attention to it. His colleagues don't pay attention to it. They keep doing the same thing over and over again. So why should I go through writing all these articles and these folks don't pay attention to it? So now to get back to your question again, that's about it. Now, I think that I've had conversations with Jack Sostek, who was at Harvard, Nobel Prize winner, now at University of Chicago. I think he is a wonderful person, but I think he has overhyped some of his claims. He said in 2014 that he'd have life in his lab in 3 to 5 years, more like 3 years than 5. And now he confesses he's just trying to make the RNA. There's a big difference between just making RNA and having life. And so I think he's overblown it, and he said it. But I think he's a reasonable guy, and I think he's a fair man. Steve Benner, I think he has overhyped it. But I've had lunch with Steve Benner a year ago. We sat together in Israel at a meeting. We had lunch together, and this is after I slammed him pretty hard in his work. He spoke, and then the day after I spoke after him. And after that, he and I had lunch together, and people were walking up, and they thought, how could you two be sitting and having lunch together? Well, that's kind of how the scientific community is. We can really disagree with each other and sit and have lunch together. So I think he's a nice guy, but I think he overhypes it and overblows it. And to say that he's right on the verge of being able to have Darwinian evolution take over, like he said, I think he really blew it in those statements. And now I think he's actually being a little more careful. So I like these people. I've corresponded with Krishnamurti, and he was very cordial. And I like Lee Cronin. And I've had conversations with Lee Cronin. So as far as being realistic on their work, I haven't read the body of work by Clemens Reichert, but that one paper, I was really pleased with that. So there's not many. I think that Donna Blackman is quite circumspect. I think she's very careful now what she says. Some of her older articles that were written 15 or 20 years ago when she was a starting professor, I think that those extrapolated way beyond what they should have been. But I think her more recent work is she's very careful what she's saying.
Wow. Thanks for all the advice for the audience. I have another question from Ali. He actually repeated it more than once, but I'm actually going to point him to something that we did before with Dr. Tour. He says, Mr. Ishraf, please talk about 26 Al-Baqarah and 73 Al-Hajj with Dr. Tour. So for 26 Al-Baqarah, we actually talked about it a couple of years ago when I did the first interview with Dr. Tour, and this is the one that talks about the fly, Jim. So it's a challenge by Allah that he's saying, that he's challenging all the scientists or all the disbelievers on earth to create a fly. So we talked about that, and I would refer you to that episode that we had, that other podcast we had together a couple of years ago, and I'll put it also on the screen when I edit this video. But then the second one, 73 Al-Hajj, and Al-Hajj is pilgrimage, and in this. I'm sorry. Actually, 73 is the one about the fly, and 26 Al-Baqarah is about a mosquito. And what it says is, maybe we can close with this one, but I'm sure Jim will give it a nice twist. So he says here, it says, surely Allah does not shy away from using the parable of a mosquito or what is even above it. Actually, the ayah says, and it says that the believers, they know that it is the truth from the Lord, but on the other hand, the disbelievers would say or would argue, what does Allah mean by such a parable? And he says that it's a test. In our last conversation, Jim, you said, well, a fly is too big for us to try. We haven't even figured out a cell. What do you have to say about the mosquito?
And it's the same thing. I've studied mosquitoes, not in a scientific sense, but I used to sit outside and intentionally let them come and sting me just to be able to watch them. Oh. Because their coordinated flight is amazing. In this tiny little brain is all this coordinated flight. And when they would sting me, then they'd fly away, and then others would come right to the same place. Oh. So in other words, that first mosquito left a trace. He emitted, or she emitted, the pheromones, the small chemicals into the air that attracted other ones to say, here's a piece of fresh meat, and they knew exactly where to go. Wow. So you see this amazing coordination between them, and so a mosquito is hugely complex relative to a cell. Here is mosquito is a whole organism, and actually a quite amazing organism. So that's really far advanced, and we have no idea how one of those could have been made by natural processes. Science is utterly clueless on that.
Wow, and this testimony coming from somebody who actually manufactures nano cars from molecules is an important testimony, everybody, because Dr. Tour, he has his work about, those microscopic nano cars made of one or more molecule, and they would go into a race, right, Jim? So it's quite amazing. So he knows what's difficult and what's not, and this drone called the mosquito is really something. So I think this is a great testimony, and thanks, Ali. And I think we'll close with this last question from Tony Maurice, and he says, Dr. Tour, are amyloids solving any origin of life problem? And
the answer is the answer is no. This is from Grayson. He's a young man who spoke to me at the debate, and then he made a video about me. He's a YouTuber. It became very clear to me he was just trying to promote his YouTube channel by provoking me so that I'd contest with his YouTube channel like I did with Dave's YouTube channel. Dave Farina's YouTube channel, when he first provoked me, had 780,000 or so, 700 and something thousand subscribers. Now he's got 2.5 million. So you poke Jim Tour, he goes after you and your YouTube channel. So Grayson did the same thing. He came up to me very nicely at the end of the debate. He talked with me, and then he made a YouTube video which was not flattering at all. I mean, and just took little segments out of context. And so that's Grayson. And so I said, I'm not going to go on your YouTube channel to try to bring more people to it. No, what he does is he says, okay, in amyloids, they don't need to fold. They can get into their position naturally. And he argues that you don't need you can just use a subset. You can just use 10 of the amino acids. You don't need the other 10 amino acids that have functional side chains. Nobody has ever shown that you can get away with just 10 of the amino acids. Plus, even if you have those 10, you have to have those polymerizing. The chances of getting them are very, very hard. So you have 10 amino acids. Even if you had something that was 50 units long, so then you'd have 10 to the 50th possible combinations to give you it. And then he says, and you don't have to worry about it folding because amyloid doesn't have to fold. Well, the vast majority of enzymes need to be folded. Amyloid is a specific type. And nobody in their right mind looks at this and says, this solves the polymerization problem. It doesn't, because the free energy is positive. And so those don't want to polymerize. They keep going back to starting material. Ahmed, you know something about free energy being an engineer. So when the free energy is positive, it keeps wanting to go back. They hydrolyze, they go to starting material. So this idea that amyloid solves it, this is another naive idea by somebody who understands very little about the science and the chemistry behind this. You never solve the free energy problem in making those polymers. They always want to go back. And even when you try to make them with 10 amino acids, nobody's ever shown functionality from these things. And the amyloids aren't just based on 10. So it's a very naive idea. And Maurice, you are a tremendous guy. You've been a big supporter of mine, and I appreciate the question. Thank you. So this way I could address Grayson without taking on his channel, because I'm not here to support his channel.
Wow. So, Dr. Tour, I think this has been a great, I spent a great time with you. Really a great example for somebody who is, who could have just had his great career and enjoy his companies and his research and being applauded by everybody, but chose the difficult path to come out with the truth and save, I would say, literally, if not millions, but at least hundreds of thousands of young people who are intoxicated with this. You know, science has figured it all out, and science has left no place to God. And, this myth of a creator need not be there. And if God is there, he doesn't care, or whatever they would like to sell to the public. So, Jim, God bless you. And I hope, as Tony here is rightfully saying, he says, Dr. Tour, we love you, brother. And I think millions of people love you, and millions of people pray for you for success and for blessings and for peace. And I also hope that everybody who has watched this would know that people who believe in God have so much in common. And let me take your comment on this final thing, Jim, is, do you agree with me that people who believe in God, like you and me, regardless that we are following different religions, have much more in common to stand together in this world that's getting more godless and more atheist every day? What do you think? What's your final thoughts about that?
I think you and I have the same fights we have to battle. I think just like when things become decadent and things become destructive, that your heart is in pain, just like my heart, because we both hate sin and we both hate to see people move away from God, because God is precious and wonderful. Yeah. And we know that the good that comes from people who follow God. So I think that you and I feel in many cases the same way. And I've never been to Egypt, but I've been to Saudi Arabia, and it's really interesting. I have more open conversations with people about God in Saudi Arabia than I can with scientists in my own university. I'm talking about faculty in Saudi Arabia, because there's a core there. There's a core belief. And I was talking with one guy, and I said, do you really believe that Abraham walked through these deserts? He says, absolutely. For sure. And I said, you and I believe the same sorts of things.
Yeah.
And we want the same things for our children. We don't want our children to go in the godless way. We don't want to send our kids to college and see them come out godless. I mean, we share the same sort of things. I come from a Jewish home. I've received Jesus as my Messiah. So in many ways, I'd be called a Jewish Christian. And but I identify with you, and I think that our struggles are often the same. And we're actually seeing it in the United States in schools. It's the Christian parents and the Muslim parents joining together against these really evil school boards that are putting things in our schools that none of us like. And we're on the same side of this barricade here, and we're going forth together in this. So and we want the same for our children. We want good for our children. And I think that I have the right way. You think that you have the right way, and I understand that. But I appreciate your heart, and I appreciate the good that you're trying to do. I appreciate the good that you're trying to bring to your community of listeners. And I appreciate you as a friend. And I say, God bless you. God bless your family. And may the peace of God rest upon you and upon your family.
Wow, Jim, that was really touching. And I was thinking of a verse in the Quran, and you have actually almost said the verse the way it is. So I'm just going to repeat it to you. It says in Arabic, وَلِكُلٍّ وِجْهَةٌ هُوَ مَوَلِّيهَا فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ. And what this means in English is, for each religious following is a direction toward which it faces. So race in the path of good. So this is the direction that the Quran gives to Muslims. There are others who believe in God, who have their different way, who have their different following, who have their different qibla. And so the right way is that we race in the way of doing good. We both have the same direction. We both identify with the same moral principles, and that, it's the one God who created us all. And we all want to do the good, and we all want to deny the evil and protect our children. So I was really touched that you actually said the same meaning, really. So may God bless you and bless your work, and bless the work of everybody who follows your path with courage and boldness and openness. And I hope everybody has enjoyed this. Thanks for everyone. Please do follow Dr. James' channel, and come back to Finding Truth for more content, hopefully as good as this. And I doubt, because there's not so many people like Dr. James Tour.
If you're enjoying this series, give us a thumbs up and click the subscribe button, and that way you'll hear when we're coming out with new videos. There are no salaried employees in this organization. All the accounting, all the legal work, that's all done by friends of mine. The only thing that I have to pay for is the production work, and if you could help us out with that, I'd appreciate it. There's a link below where you can just click on that and help us in several different ways. Thank you.